Good morning, everyone. I'm Jess McCauley. I work with Prince William Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm excited to introduce Julie Flanagan. She is the arborist with Prince William County Watershed Management Branch, and today she will be presenting Recreating Forests in Your Yard. We ask that everyone hold questions until the end, and we'll have a 15-minute Q&A. Excuse me. So Ms. Flanagan has over 35 years of experience working in the field of urban forestry, first in Fairfax County and for the last 24 years here in Prince William County. She holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Forestry and Wildlife Management from Virginia Tech. Julie has spearheaded changes to county regulations that have increased the use of native plants on all new development projects throughout Prince William County. She has successfully identified, planned, and implemented over 25 reforestation projects, returning native forests to over 90 acres of public and HOA land in Prince William County, which is amazing. Restoring the land to forest is one of Julie's favorite aspects of her work. And now here is Julie Flanagan presenting Recreating Forests in Your Yard.
It is definitely one of my favorite aspects, and being in an environment like this is another favorite aspect. So I'm going to need to stay here so I can switch because we don't have a clicker. But I'm presuming that you guys are here because you're interested in taking some portion of your land, or at least you're curious about taking some portion of your land, or maybe your common area land in your neighborhood and converting that to a natural forest. So we're going to go through the different layers of the forest and talk about each one and how they might be brought into your property. And I think that when I think about reforesting, it's like you heard Nancy Lawson talking, she was so good, but what you're doing really when you're reforesting, you're inviting creatures, you're inviting life to come into your property in a way that is like no other environment, because we live in a forest. Virginia wants to be a forest. It naturally wants to be a forest. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to kind of do a spoiler thing here and say that if you just stop mowing your property, you can do two things. Stop mowing your property, control invasives, and you'll get a forest. It's really that simple. But oftentimes we like to kind of be a part of that. Move it along maybe a little bit. So this is going to be some ways to move that along.
Is your presentation going to include most of this region or just Prince William?
It's going to, I'm not going to talk a lot, and that's a good question, because I'm not going to present you with a lot of species to look at. And the reason is that I don't know your property, and everybody's going to have a little bit of a different scenario. So I'm going to give you some resources where you can go and find good lists of plants for your property, but I'm kind of going to avoid plant lists. So this talk would apply pretty much anywhere in the eastern United States. But I will, when I hit those species, they are going to be more regional to the mid-Atlantic area. All right, now I need to know why this is not advancing. Oh, there we go. Hope I didn't advance twice. It looks like I have to reach it. Oh, now it's working. Okay. All right. So in your healthy forest, there are 5 basic layers: the overstory, understory, shrub, herbaceous, and leaf litter. I'm going to go through each one of those. And hopefully, can we get rid of some of those bars?
Oh, that's not good.
Oh, I should remove those bars. There's some people that's really not happening. Okay, so where do you start? Well, that's going to depend on where you are in your own property. Most of the time, when I'm reforesting land, I'm starting from square one. I'm dealing with either lawn or an old field. And so I'm starting with nothing. And so I use the big pieces. I start with the overstory trees and the understory trees. And that's typically the 2 parts of the forest that I start with. But you may have, and this is where you're going to have to sort of think about your own property as we go through this, so that you can get a sense of what do you have and which of these layers and how can you fit them in to restoring forest on your land. So some people may have big trees. You may have the overstory already in place, but either you or a previous owner has cleared out the shrub layer, they've cleared out the leaf litter, they've cleared out the smaller trees. I see that a lot. people want this park-like looking woods. And so they get rid of a lot of the smaller, lower levels and then put in grass because they want to be able to see way back in there. So if you're starting with the big trees, then just, you can learn from everything, but you're probably going to then be looking at either the understory shrub or basis leaf litter layer or some of those combinations that you're going to want to bring into your property. And as I said, we'll go over all of this. So with the overstory trees, there are over 50 species that are native to our region. So we've got a lot of choices when it comes to overstory trees. Now that selection is going to narrow as you look at your site, whether that's wet, dry, uphill, downhill, shady, whatever. So you're going to change what you're going to choose based upon your particular site. But we do have a lot of species we can choose from. The overstory trees are the primary producers of both leaf biomass and woody biomass. And both of those, both those types of biomass are the foundations of the wood web, food web. As you heard Douglas Talamy talk about earlier. The overstory trees are so vital because they're dominant. They influence everything that happens around them pretty much to some degree. They create the local environment and then they also influence the local environment. And they're strongly influencing what plant communities can exist underneath them, mainly because of shade, but because of other things too, like how they affect soil pH and organisms that live in the soil. So if you follow Douglas Talamy at all, and I was pleased to see there were so many new people here, so maybe this is new to you. This is some of Douglas Talamy's work, where he has identified the 10 most valuable genus or genera of native plant tree species, native tree species in this area in the eastern United States that host Lepidoptera. So that's the 534, that's the number of Lepidoptera. You saw some of those numbers go by on the video we saw earlier. So Quercus, the oaks, cherries, willows, birches, poplars, those are really, really good for Lepidoptera. And so if you were going to look at a list, you might just think, okay, there's lots of other plants, lots of other trees you could use on your property, but this might be someplace you might want to start. Just saying, I'll look at those species to start. Now the understory is composed of smaller species of trees. I'll try that again. Tree species that stay smaller, like think flowering dogwood, think redbud. And the understory is also composed of overstory tree species, your oaks, your maples, tulip poplars, and whatnot. But they're living, they're young. They haven't made it into the upper canopy yet. And so they are living in the understory, waiting for something to change dynamically within the forest. An old tree dies and opens up the canopy, a microburst comes and knocks down some trees. And then those trees, those overstory trees, are just waiting for that opportunity, that sunlight, which gives them energy so that they can push through and get up into the overstory. It's important you have younger overstory trees in your forest because they are the next generation that will replace what's in the overstory canopy. If you don't have those young overstory trees, you're not going to replace what's there. That last one. Oh, I also want to mention I'm a birder, so a lot of my connections here have to do with birding. The understory layer is a very important layer from hosting nesting birds. That is a very common area for our songbirds to breed in that understory layer. And then here are just, again, a sampling. Like I said, there's 27 different species you could pick from. So this is just a sampling of that. These are some of our most common ones. And they are, I think most of these you'd have a fairly easy time finding in a local nursery, certainly in a native plant nursery, but probably a lot of them in just your typical average nursery as well. Probably not a box store, but a local nursery you would be able to. I'll just point out a couple. Upper right, that's pawpaw. It's not a real familiar plant. It loves wet areas, floodplains, low levels, stream corridors, and things like that. That is its flower. And as it blooms, it becomes more maroon. It's a very subtle, it doesn't produce tons of flowers. So it's one of those things you go out and look for, and you can really enjoy it as you're finding it in the woods. And behind that, you see a blue background. That is Virginia bluebells. So oftentimes where you find Virginia bluebells, you will find pawpaw. And they obviously bloom at the same time. And then next to that is, I don't have it up there, is sassafras. Now you might think, oh, that's beautiful fall color. And indeed, Francis sassafras has beautiful fall color, but that is spring color. That is what this leaf looks like as it's emerging from its buds in spring. Now, some of them might be more green, but oftentimes you're going to get sort of an early preview of what the fall color is going to be like, because the leaves will come out in similar tones, but they're fresh and they're spotless and they're really beautiful to watch emerge. So what do you do? Some practical ways. Okay, if you want to put overstory trees, OS, and understory trees, US, in the ground, what do? Well, first thing you think about is density. And we change our density in what we plant based upon whether or not we're protecting those trees. So because deer browse is such an issue, and when you have a young tree, deer browse can be devastating and easily kill your young trees. So we plant at 450 trees per acre if we're using protective tubes, but we'll up that to 650 trees per acre if we're not using protective tubes. And the whole idea is that we're sacrificing, we figure the deer are going to get to them, we're sacrificing a certain percentage of them, or whatever percentage it happens to be, and then hoping that because there's so many young saplings or seedlings out there that the deer can't find them all, the deer can't eat them all, and then we'll have some success. The recommended ratio, that's what we use, which is 55% overstory trees compared to 45% understory trees. Now, that's not hard and fast. You might look at your forest and see that you have a lot of overstory trees and not very many understory trees, or maybe you've got some little saplings already coming up and you're supplementing it. So you can play with that ratio as you want. But if I were starting from scratch, from ground zero with lawn or pasture land, I would start with that ratio. That's just a good one to use. Weed control is really important because as you plant into whatever it is you're planting into, unless you've got an existing forest, unless you've got some leaf litter down there already, you're going to get competition from herbaceous plants, the lawn grasses or the meadow grasses or whatever's there. So we started off, the first ones I used to do, I used this for weed mats, and they're not biodegradable. They're like a polypropylene or something like that. There's some kind of that's what I want, product that is like a vinyl or something along those lines. And so they don't decompose. So you might want to take them out. And we're gradually getting away from them. We rarely use them anymore, if at all. And what we've gone to is coconut fiber mats. This is a coconut fiber mat. It's 30, that one's 30 inches in diameter. You can see a big stack of them there. We used all of those in that particular planting. Very good for smothering an area of grasses immediately around the tree. And then they will naturally decompose in about 2 to 3 years. So you don't have to come back and take them out. They just will decompose on their own. Not so with this format. Mulch, of course, is a natural material if you use natural mulches, and it can be very helpful. I find that weeds will make their way back into the mulch fairly quickly. And also it can be quite expensive if you're using a lot of it to lay it out and to buy it. So we have done complete mulching of some of our projects, and it turned out to be the most expensive part of the project. So that's, like I said, optional. Bird netting, if you're going to use protective tubes, definitely use the bird netting, and I'll show you why in a minute. And removal of the bird netting is often your first maintenance item. And then signage. We do a lot of planting in parks and in common areas. And so it's important for us to put out signage, educational signage, that tells people why this is looking kind of messy, because an early forest often looks very messy and people tend to think somebody should go mow that. And so we want them to understand why we're not mowing that. And that's been very helpful. We've had almost no vandalism when we've put signage out. If you're doing this in your own yard, that may not be.
It is.
There's
That was the most important first step in reinforcing that front yard, is to control expectations.
Front yard, absolutely, because everybody's going to see it. Absolutely. So should you use protection? Depends on what kind of density you might want to put your plants out in, or what size plants you use. So deer, like I said, they're almost always a concern. The tree protection tubes, we've used them a lot, but we don't always use them. This is a tube. This is a closer up version of the tubes you see in these two pictures. And these are ventilated, so the air can move through them. This is the bird netting that we talked about. It goes on top, and usually the tree is not up here when you plant it. The tree's way down here somewhere. Because we're planting little 12 and 18-inch seedlings oftentimes. But this one, the plant has grown up and it's reached the top. And now this one should either have the bird netting taken off now, or maybe like 6 months ago would have been a good time as well. Because if you don't take it off, the tree may be able to work its way through the opening of the bird netting, but the tips of those shoots that are growing are so tender that even that really fine, loose, limber bird netting, the tips of the trees can hit that, and then they'll start to curl back down again. So once you get to the point where the tree is somewhere near the top, somewhere in this area, take the bird netting off. Why is there bird netting? Because they found that before they used bird netting, birds would come, songbirds, bluebirds, sparrows, they would come and sit perch on the end of that tube, and they would look down in there and they'd see a bug. And they go, ah, that looks good. They're down to get the bug, and they can't get back down. So they were finding dead birds in the tubes. So the bird netting is really helpful to keep them out of there. And then once the tree is up toward the top of the tube, you don't need that anymore. It's not biodegradable to move the whole way. They do serve a little bit as beaver protection, but eventually, as soon as you take them off, the beavers are still going to be interested in them. So you get early beaver protection, but not permanent beaver protection. And they come with a slit. The ones that we used anyway have a perforation down there. That picture that's covered up partly there is somebody forgot it. We just forgot it. And the tree got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the ability that tree gained girth, it was strong enough to make that perforation pop. And so the tube doesn't strangle the tree. So that's always get ones that have perforations. What kind of stock might you use? Well, we don't use more than like 2-inch stock that you might get in a nursery for your front yard. That's your gym, and you're planting seedlings in your front yard. So starting at the left, we have the least expensive, which is bare root seedlings, and then we're going to move to the most expensive. Bare root seedlings are, as you might describe, as they describe, you buy them, there's no soil on the root system. So you need to be careful with how you handle them. They need to be stored in a cool place. They need to be kept moist. And it's very good if you plant them within only a few days of getting them, so that they don't have to worry about taking care of them when the roots drying out and that kind of thing. There also is a somewhat narrower window of planting for bare root as compared to using a container tree. So here's what we use most often. We do use bare root, but these are ones we use most often. This is a 3-inch by 3-inch tube that's about 9 inches deep. We call them tubelings because it's cute. And most of those trees are going to be like 12 to 18 inches tall, maybe 20 inches tall at the outside. And when you pull the tree out of there, you're getting the soil that the tree grew in. So I find we have a somewhat better success rate with containerized plants than we do with the bare root. Bare root is by far less expensive, and so you can always put more out there and then just again, let nature take its course. Next up is gallon material, and those ones over on the left of the tubelings are also 1 gallon material. We do this when we want to get a little more height, and maybe we've got some grasses that we think if we buy a 4-foot tall tree or 3-foot tall tree, it might have an advantage. So again, a little more expensive, but you can find those probably in most nurseries. Now, in order to find these tubelings, you're probably going to have to go to a nursery that deals with restoration, that their business is more on the restoration end of things, because they're producing hundreds and hundreds of these and they're selling them by thousands to people who are reforesting large areas. So you might need to also check to make sure that you can purchase a smaller quantity of them, or get together with a group of people and purchase a larger quantity together. Up in the upper right, that's whips. And maybe we could admit some. Whips are, as you might, they're called that because typically they're 4, 5, 6 feet tall, and usually they have almost no branching on them, so they look more like a whip. They're often in 1 gallon, 2 gallon pots. They are more expensive, but one of the possibilities with this is that if you get a 5 or 6 foot tall tree, you're going to be planting that above the deer browse line. So, if you're trying to avoid deer, whipstop can be a good idea. Now, we've had mixed success with that. We've had times where we put it out there and the deer didn't seem to bother it at all. And then we've had other times where they seem to learn to bend it over and nibble on it. So, but it is a possibility. And I just want to point out this family. They came to 2 of our volunteer reforestations, and they were so fun to have there. This mom and her 4 kids, they were just great. And while they were there, they found a turtle, and it made their day. So that was okay. Sources of trees, native plant nurseries. You can go to Plant Nova Natives, and maybe Jess, if you can put that in the chat as a source, people can find that as a live link. They are a good source, and oftentimes you'll find smaller stock at some of the native plant nurseries. They're not always selling the big material. Local retail garden centers, more so for the larger material. And then Friends with Woods. So that picture in the lower right is my backyard, and those are trees that I pulled from my dad's yard and from my own townhouse yard, because we both have perennial beds, and we didn't want trees growing up and shading our perennial beds. So I was like, wow, I'm not gonna waste these. I put them in a pot. And matter of fact, they're in a pot downstairs in the hospitality room. So if any of you want free trees, they're down there. Some of them I forgot to label, some of them are labeled. But you're welcome to take them home with you and give them a good home. Okay. And that's probably some of the ones that are in that picture. But you know, that's true. A lot of people who have woods behind their home or near their home are not going to want things coming up in their yard. And if you find them and you say, hey, I'd be happy to come over with my shovel, a little extra dirt, so I fill the hole back in after I've dug it, and then just take those home with you. And that can be a good way to get free trees. And the last way to get free trees is with some species is acorns, walnuts, hickory nuts that you can find in the woods, and then bring them home, check them to see if nobody's eating them, because then they probably won't work. But then you're going to have to look to somebody else who's actually done that, potted them and grown them, because I have not tried that yet.
Fairfax Relief also.
So they do it that way?
Free.
Okay. Free seedlings?
Yep.
Okay.
Fairfax Relief.
Okay. There you
They
go.
get theirs from Virginia Department of Forestry by virginiatrees.com.
Okay. All right. And are those bare root or container?
Those are very,
Okay. Sounds good.
1 or 2 years.
All right, let's, so that's the overstory and understory layer. The next layer down is the shrub layer. And this one is defined as basically being from ground level up to about 10 or 15 feet, because that's about as big as shrubs get. This is also very important habitat for breeding birds. There are a lot of birds that breed in our shrub layer. And they are looking for dense shrubs that they can hide their nests in. And that's important for them to feel safe. They're not going to just breed out in the open. They're going to put their nests in place they can tuck it in. So a nice dense shrub is a good offering to them. This is often the missing layer because of that deer browse. And so it's hard to get it into place also because of the deer browse. So you're going to probably need, if you put shrubs out there, you're going to need to protect them and fence them off in some way, welded wire fence, vinyl wire fence or something like that, and to surround them until they get tall enough that they're above the deer browse. So what strategies can you do? I'm going to give you 3.
I'm trying to administer the pop-up here.
Okay. So you can plant with the tree seedlings, the overstory trees and understory trees. We've done that, and we've had the most success with it when we have done a lot of fencing. If we didn't do a lot of fencing, we had very bad results, at least for the shrubs. But one of the things you have to realize about a reforestation is that, especially if you're starting from scratch, your land is going to go through a very dynamic change in a short, relatively speaking, short amount of time. So when you start off, you probably have a lot of sun. Within anywhere from 6 to 12 years, that canopy is going to get big enough that it's going to close. And now you're going to have a lot of shade. And so the plants that are starting off and loving that sun may not love the shade later on. You can find species that are have a range of tolerance, but no guarantee that as that changes on site, that plant is going to adapt with that change in sunlight and make that transition with you. They may, but you may have a higher incidence of mortality because they're not making that transition with you. So then you can try strategy number 2, which is to go ahead and put your overstory trees and understory trees in, and then wait until that canopy closes and come back and plant underneath that. The negative side of that is that now your overstory trees and understory trees have gotten established and their root systems are out in there, and you're going to then plant into an area where you've got an established root system. That is a bit more difficult to try and get a new plant to take when it's got that kind of competition. So I think you would have, and I haven't actually tried that myself, I think you would have a higher mortality rate. My preference is number 1, if you're going to do one of these 2. But here's the third option, and this one I've just started doing on my own. And maybe when we get to the Q&A, if people have other options for how to get the shrubs to survive, you can share those. This is kind of a free-flowing approach. So once you've got your overstory trees and understory trees have come in, they're shaded, and for you who had the existing woodland and you're going to plant at the edge. So what you can often do is plant at the edge of that. Plant at the edge where you've got at least part sun, maybe even full sun, and plant your species there so that they have the sunlight to really take. And then if those are berrying producing or even seed producing, when they get to that age where they start producing, then you enlist your bird friends and whoever else. The wind can carry those seeds into that area, or the birds can carry it in. And then they become a seed source. And that's what's really missing to get those shrubs into the woods, is a seed source. So if you're providing that seed source by putting those plants next to your forest, I think it's highly likely that you're going to get movement of those plants into your woods. Enlist the assistance of birds. I have a feeder. I have kind of, I think it was your scenario with a woods common area behind. Was that yours? Yeah, and so I have a common area behind my townhome. And I have a bird feeder. And what I've noticed, I've been there 18 years now, and I've gained several shrubs by just simply having a bird feeder. They're not depositing, they probably are depositing seeds that are in my bird feeder, but they're going other places around, and they've obviously been to a silky dogwood, and they've been to coralberry, and they've been to black gum, and they've been to red twig dogwood, and then they've come to my feeder. And while they were at my feeder, they pooped. And I got all these free shrubs as a result of that, which I was very happy for. So they really do a good job and even in nature, I mean, that's one of the primary ways you're getting your reforestation going in the first place, is from birds. So take advantage of them. But they may not go to a native plant. They might go to a non-native plant. So you're always going to need to be conscious of the need to control invasives. And then depending upon your deer pressure, you may need to protect them. I actually, because I'm in my woodland is this little narrow area, I don't have much deer pressure because the deer don't like to come up in that tight spot between the houses. So I get very little deer pressure. I don't really have to control it for them. I haven't done any protection. Okay, herbaceous wildflowers. These are the stars, if you would, of our forests. In the spring, we have amazing displays of wonderful diversity of native wildflowers. That one might be a little bit more towards summer, but anyway. Bloodroot, showy orchis, foam flower, these are all favorites of mine. Yellow slippers, Solomon seal, that's the true Solomon seal. Large flowered trillium. May apple to the left of that, and then to the right is Dutchman's breeches. And then toadshade trillium. All of these are shade-loving wildflowers, and almost all of these are available in nurseries. You probably would have a hard time getting yellow lady slippers and showy orchis, but pretty much everything else in here you can get from a nursery, especially a native plant nursery. And just like with the shrubs, you can plant them maybe in a more controlled setting, or then plant them out to the edge and let them work their way in. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit there.
Were those all on the same site?
No, those are from all over the place. Some of them are in my backyard.
Solomon seal grows well in my yard.
What doesn't?
Home flower.
foam flower doesn't, yeah, no, they're not all from the same site, but the foam flower, that picture of foam flower is not from my backyard, but I do have foam flower in my backyard and now in the woods. And I have toad shade in my yard and I haven't gotten it into the woods yet. Bloodroot in my yard, but I haven't noticed that it's in the woods yet, but I do have, dwarf crested iris that I've moved from my forest to the edge of the forest and it's spread. One that spreads very easily is wild ginger. I put a little bit of wild ginger in the woods and it is now making colonies of wild ginger. So, yeah, actually, can you wait till the end? All right, thank you. And then bluebells. Bluebells are very easy to transplant and they don't have to have a floodplain to do well. So you can bring them into your garden or even the edge of the woods. I do have a small stream that runs through my common area, so it's kind of low ground. And the bluebells I put in like 15 years ago, and now I've got over 30, and I haven't done anything to them except let them go. So how to establish the herbaceous layer? It's kind of like the shrub layer. So I would say with your initial planting, you don't have to do anything. There are so many of the herbaceous plants that love sun will come in naturally on their own. And so you can just, again, think about controlling invasives. That's probably going to be the biggest thing that we need to do is control the invasives. Things like Chinese Lespedeza might come in, or some like Japanese honeysuckle or something like that might come in. So let's see. You could overseed if you want, and there are native seed growers and suppliers. I'll just say Ernst Seed because they are very helpful. When I've gone into the phone with them, they have some of their staff that'll spend a long time talking to me about what might work on my property. And so they're really good. Or you can do after canopy closure. And that's what I've done in my backyard because it's already a closed canopy in the woods behind me. And so what we found though, when we've done our own reforestations, you might think, okay, is this herbaceous layer coming in on its own? And I think the answer so far is very, very slowly. After 20 years on one of my sites, I found 2 species of herbaceous plants in that reforestation area. And I think part of the issue was there was really not much seed source nearby. And so I had Christmas fern and something I don't remember the name of. It was a taller, produced little sticky things, but it was native. So let's see. Okay, so here's some aids for finding plants that might work in your yard. If you haven't seen the Virginia Native Plant Society table downstairs, they're selling these. I think they're $5. And then the native plants for wildlife habitat conservation landscaping. That both of these are similar, and then they give you very concise understanding of these plants. So it's sun or shade, wet or dry, wet, wet, moist, dry soils, clay sand, loams. It's not going to go into detail, but it will give you a good enough idea that you could begin to build a plant list for your property from these aids. And then the USDA plant database, I use that a lot just to find out if something's native in my county, because you can go on that if you know the scientific name. It's really easy to use, and say I want to put American Pachysandra in my property. Is it native in Prince William County? And you can find out. Pachysandra, it's not terminalis, that's the Japanese one.
Alleghenies.
I know, I think it's something, it has to do with it being procumbens.
Procumbens?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Pachysandra procumbens, because it flowers low. If it flowers terminally, that's the Japanese one, pull it, get rid of it. Anyway, I wanted to know if it grew in Prince William County. So I took Pachysandra procumbens and went on this site. And if you go into their maps, you can expand them, and then you'll see the county data. And it does not grow natively in Prince William County. It's in my yard because it's a lovely plant. It does grow elsewhere in the eastern United States, but not in Prince William. Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center, their site only deals with native plants. So if you find it on that site, it's native to North America. But that's native to your area, you'll have to do more research to find out. And then Plant Nova natives, they are an excellent study. I make lots of use of them. They have a lot of plant lists for different scenarios, different kind of yards, different like stormwater management ponds or roadsides or under power lines and things like that. So take advantage of them, and they do focus on the Northern Virginia region. Now, I want to spend a fair amount of time looking at.
All of a sudden, 15-minute Q&A starts in 12.
Okay, thank you. I want to spend a fair amount of time on leaf litter because it's often undervalued. And not just leaf litter, but dead material in general is often undervalued. And I really like that Nancy Lawson spent a good amount of time on it, and I am too. So this zone of dead organic matter, it's organic plants and organic animals, is actually full of living creatures. So you've got the organic matter that's dead, but then there's this entire ecosystem and in the top layer of soil and at that surface of soil that's in there consuming that organic matter. And it's very important that you have that in your forest. Now, that contains fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, all these different creatures that are aerating, that are decomposing plant material. And then the things like bacteria and fungi are doing the decomposition on such a microscopic level. That's when it becomes available to plants. They convert that organic matter into usable nutrients for plants to take up. So you have to have these in your soil in order for you to have a productive soil. And then they're going to promote the best health for your plants. That leaf litter will control the moisture. It'll keep the soil moist for a longer period of time. It'll defer or delay the effects of drought. It's, as we just mentioned, it's important for nutrient cycling and the symbiotic relationships, particularly the mycorrhizal fungi. Those form with tree roots and are extremely beneficial to tree roots for taking up more nutrients and water from the soil to supply to your trees. And then the fungi, what they get from that is sugars from the tree. So they get to feed on the sugars and they give the nutrients and water to the trees. That leaf litter also is habitat for a lot of ground feeding birds, ground nesting birds, and ground hibernators. We'll talk a little bit about that in, I think, just a little bit. But these are some, notice these are some ground feeding and ground nesting birds. And notice how they have very subtle leaf-like colors to them. And one of my favorites is the whippoorwill, who is absolutely amazing in its feathers, how it blends with the leaf litter. That picture at the top right is a pile of leaf litter that we pulled out during our root appreciation that Jim was at. Pull that out from the base of an oak tree. You can see how thick it is. You can see all the roots going through it and how there's different layers of decomposition. So that is like sweetness. That's gold for a tree. Now, Douglas Tallamy, in his book, The Nature of Oaks, made a very interesting statement. If you've listened to him at all, you've probably heard people say, if you're going to plant anything, plant an oak. Well, you really have to modify that a little bit, because what he's found, has told us about is that 94% of the species of caterpillars that feed on oak drop to the forest floor to overwinter in or under the leaf litter. So we don't want to create an ecological trap. We don't want to think, oh, oaks host all these caterpillars, so I'm going to put an oak in my front yard where I've got all that lawn. And then I'm doing this wonderful thing because now I'm going to get all these caterpillars up in the canopy, which you will. But the problem is that they can't complete their life cycle. So you've got the eggs up in the canopy, you've got the larvae up in the canopy, they're feeding, they're providing food for birds and other creatures. But when they need to produce the next generation, they need to drop out of that canopy into the leaf litter or some species down into that top layer of soil. And that's where they'll pupate. That's where they'll go through their last immature stage until they become an adult. And they need to do that in the leaves or in the top layer of soil. So if you've got a rock hard lawn, which those bugs can't excavate into, they're not going to be able to do that last part of their life cycle. If you don't have leaf litter, and that's where they want to hide, they have to go someplace else. So if you do put an oak in, let's create that leaf litter area around it so that we can have the full cycle and keep supporting the Lepidoptera. And then if you have that leaf litter and you get all those organisms that we were just talking about, that aerates the soil. It makes the soil more organic. It makes it more inviting, it keeps it moisture, and you might actually someday get a woodcock in there. So you see on the, how long his bill is there on the right. This is an adorable creature. They're really kind of dopey looking birds. But he will go through the forest, he'll waddle through the forest, and then he's looking for earthworms. So he's going to take that bill and he's going to put it down about 3 inches into the soil, which he can't do in your lawn. He's not even, he won't even come here. He's going to totally ignore you. But if you give him some good leaf litter to work in and that organic, nutrient-rich, life-rich soil, he just might come to your property. How much? Great, thank you. Okay, do you have to create the organic layer? No, you really don't. It's a matter of choice, because like I said, if you stop mowing and you control your invasives, you're going to get a forest, including the leaf litter. So if you create early through mulching, you may foster a greater survival rate, but it's also going to be more expensive. Now, down logs, definitely keep those. Pileated woodpeckers spend about 40% of their time foraging on the ground on down logs and looking for exactly what you see him pulling out there. He's pulling out a big, fat, juicy beetle larvae. And then he's going to suck that little thing down and he's going to look for another one. So so down logs, keep them, they're good. They enrich the soil, don't get rid of them. And then you have all this life. There's mushrooms, there's snails, there's mosses. And then if you want to go even microscopically, if you study somebody like Kimmerer, I can't remember her first name, but she did a gathering moss, Robin, yeah, Kimmerer. She talks about all the life that's happening just in a little patch of that moss. So really good stuff. I'm probably going to go a little bit over, but I'll try to go more quickly. Standing dead trees are good for cavity nesters, like this adorable great horned owl. That tree on the left is an ash tree. I had about 5 that died in the woods behind my house because of the emerald ash borer. I went to, it's in my HOA property, and when the HOA hired the company to come out, I happened to be there that day, and I said, Mr. Sawyer, would you please leave the top 20 feet? He said, sure. So that was probably 4 years ago. This last year, there was a nest hole. And I haven't figured out who's in there yet, who's going to make use of it, but I'm going to keep an eye on it this year. It's great habitat for all different kinds of creatures, and I'm going to buzz through this because we're running out of time. Uprooted logs or uprooted trees. I kind of just would tell people, cut it, drop it. But in fact, there are digger bees and miner bees that use that soil. You might, next time you go past an uprooted tree, you might just take a closer look at it. If you see these little holes in it, those are going to be the specialized bees that make their nests in here and lay their eggs. And it becomes a mini ecosystem. While I was watching their bees, there was a skink that came by, and I kept thinking he was going to try and make use of the bees. I didn't see that, but I figured he might. Now, here's just one example. I'm going to go through a series of slides that are from a reforestation that we did. If you've seen my presentation, I use this one often because it's the one I have the most years on. This site is now 23 years old, or will be 23 years old in another 2 months. So it started like this. It's in a park. It had a sloughing bank, which we shaved back. And then we had volunteers come out and planted it. And if you keep your eye on that big tulip poplar on the right bank, it's in all these pictures. So here's the day after planting, or the day of planting, I should say. Those are the Vispor mats that you see there that we try not to use anymore. And we did put some biologs. That's the round logs at the edge of the stream, because we were trying to get some herbaceous plants to grow and begin to control that bank. And you can see that we also used shrubs. This was one that wound up being fairly successful with the shrub. We did fence it. Here's September 2002, the second growing season, end of the second growing season. Now, talking about what do you do with the herbaceous layer? Pretty much everything you see in here that's herbaceous, we did not plant, right? So we've got fall asters, we've got Bidens, I believe that's no, we don't want lesser celandine. Makes you sneeze, ragweed. We got cattails, we didn't plant cattails, and then more Bidens and other things, I don't know what they are happening throughout here. None of it was planted. It all came in voluntarily.
The second year.
That's the second year. Now, we did cover this with mulch. So this was a little more expensive because we took care of the competition by covering it with mulch. It was only a 1/4 acre parcel. And so we did do that. And that probably helped with that. So here's June 2013, the 13th growing season. We've got canopy closure, which we probably got in the 6th or 7th year. You can see how it even looks like the stream is healthier now. And there's a rich layers here. This is not getting consumed by deer. It's got a lot of layers to it. And then just a kind of an apples to apples. So we're winter picture before, winter picture in the 19th growing season. And that just looks a whole lot healthier. So, the rewards, I think the rewards of planting. I'm going to leave this slide up while we go through our questions. The rewards of planting are things that you might think, I'm going to plant a forest. It's going to take me years to appreciate this. I might never see the fullness of this forest. But in reality, it's so dynamic that you can see cool changes taking place within a year or two of putting things out there. And then I'm still planting and I'm going to retire maybe in a year or two. But I'm thinking, yeah, get these trees out there. And then maybe in 20 years, I'll be able to come back and see what's going on. So thank you for your attention. We are going to go to questions and answers, and we're going to try and alternate between somebody live here and then somebody online. So I've got a live person here. Go ahead.
Multiple times through the presentation, you talked about you just need to control invasives. And so to me, the most overwhelming part of getting started with reforesting my 5 acres is I'm just like, stilt grass and all the things that I was like, I don't even know where to begin to control those. I mean, I love those cocoa mats, and that'll be great for controlling it around the actual plantings.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is just the
Right.
base of everything.
Right. And that's a problem. So one thing, it doesn't necessarily control them in any kind of permanent way, but you can definitely mow before you plant. And that will help knock things back a little bit, but chances are they're going to come back fairly quickly. So invasives is a real problem that you do need to think about and tackle. And I think using tubes might be not a bad idea, because at least when you say you've got Japanese honeysuckle or a mile a minute or something like that, that's really aggressive, you can see it growing up the tubes. And so you can go out and free it from the tubes.
So you don't mean you have to clear the entire 5 acres, you just mean control it from overrunning the things you've planted?
Well, both. You want to control it from overrunning the things you've planted so that they can survive.
Right.
But ultimately, if you want a healthy forest, you're going to need to control it on a broader level. And so hiring somebody to come out, we're not big proponents of pesticide use, but when you have a large property, sometimes that's what you have to do. Do we have somebody
You
on?
mentioned stilt grass. In my experience, the natives will push out the stilt grass if you support them.
Yeah, I haven't seen that 100% yet.
Saw it in Everett.
Really? Good to know. Stilt grass is a real problem. It's it can handle shade, it can handle sun, it can handle shade, it can handle wet, it can handle drying. So it's a real problem. We're going to go online for our next question.
Yeah, so someone is asking how to protect herbaceous from deer browse, and is it necessary?
I have not, well, my experience with herbaceous is I haven't put it in on only one of my county reforestations that I use herbaceous. And I did not protect them from deer, and there were some that made it and did okay. In my yard, I don't protect it from deer, and I don't find that, I don't have a lot of deer coming back and browsing, but I don't find that some of the herbaceous plants that there actually are browsing, like wild ginger, or dwarf crested iris, that they're not actually even interested in those. A little bit, but not much. So maybe somebody has more experience with
You're
those.
planting with, especially if you've got a lot of sun, using native grasses with your herbaceous, because the deer don't eat grass.
Yeah, kind of like what Nancy Lawson was talking about, that you use a sticky bush to protect the redbud from the deer. And you can do that perhaps with the grass.
Greenbrier.
Greenbrier is good. Yes, sir.
Have you had a lot of success with broadcasting seed as a more affordable alternative for erosion control situations or areas that have been clear cut and you're trying to restore? I mean, I've done mass scale plantings like you haven't, not as many, but that is a timely, it's intensive, and it's expensive.
Yeah.
And even if you go with saplings from beat off or free saplings, the tubes are expensive. It's a laborious process. So broadcasting seed, how realistic is it and is it effective?
I'm sorry that I don't have experience with that. When I first started early on, there were some people who were getting nuts and fruit and various seeds and broadcasting them. I think there are other people who do have experience with that. Jim, do you have experience with that?
Not for tree seeds. I know that Joe Rossetti in our department is working on some prep projects where they're using broadcast seeds.
Yeah.
Planting.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't know, but I do know that there are people who have used different techniques to try and take advantage of seeds. And some of them have had to do with building sort of woody barricades, like dead wood barricades, and then they'll sow seeds underneath that so that at least the deer and maybe the turkey aren't getting to them. But I think that they'd still be open to predation by mice and other creatures that might be interested in those seeds.
If anyone's interested, I have free Amorpha fruticosa seeds. You come grab some afterwards.
Cool.
Free.
Okay, so that was in person, online.
A couple more. So how do you know when your leaf litter layer is too thick? Is there ever a time when you should reduce it? I'm noticing less and less green in our forest floor where there used to be partridge berry, running cedar, etc. Thanks.
So I have never needed to reduce leaf litter unless somebody is blowing a whole bunch of it into the woods, which has happened. We typically in our forests have very healthy soil organisms that are busily decomposing leaf litter. And that's why you don't see leaves pile up over time in a forest, is because there's all sorts of things eating them. So I've never had a need to do that. And I would say that partridge berry, that was one of the species. What was another species?
Running cedar.
Running cedar. Okay, partridge berry is not very shade tolerant in my experience. And so it may be disappearing just because they don't have enough sunlight for it. Running cedar,
Very soil dependent.
yeah, soil dependent, and it should. I mean, if you had it, if the soils are changing because of the leaves, that could affect it, I suppose. But I just don't have experience with that to know exactly what might be causing that.
Running cedar all over Vienna.
Yeah,
Or Vienna West.
yeah,
They've got good soils.
yeah.
And partridge berry, I find a lot out in certain types of forests. So they're going to grow on the acidic soils under the dryland oaks, where you also find mountain laurel and blueberry and huckleberry.
So you're finding them in shaded areas?
Shaded, yeah.
Heavily shaded.
It's
Okay.
one of the characteristics of the oak forest is
Huh.
partridge berry.
I was not aware of that.
But if you're not in that type of forest in those types of soils, you don't find it.
Yeah, and that's something I should have mentioned on the herbaceous layer. I think it was written on there, but not necessarily talked about, in that the herbaceous layer is strongly dependent upon the underlying soils and the geology of the area. So you will have some natural forested that are healthy forests, which have very little herbaceous layer to them. And then as you get into the more basic soils, you will find similar looking forests that are rich in herbaceous plants. So it could be that you don't have a lot of herbaceous because it's just not natural for the forest type.
I know the soils
Yeah,
support the keep. And the DCR natural plant communities list is really useful for this. Because if you can figure out what's your natural community, that's a good starting point for what you should be planting.
and that is what Jim's referring to is the Virginia Natural Heritage Program. And they're online, and you can go there and find different forest types with lists. You have to do a little bit of sleuthing through it. I don't find it the most easy thing to use, but you have to sort of sleuth through it to find out, what species might be growing nearby, and then you can compare their species list to, like, if you have oak and hickory, you might find those species instead of oak and hickory, and then you can look at different layers of plants that would be associated with that type.
Yeah, I also use the web soil survey. So I've got the soil type, I go out there, this is the forest that's there. And then when I go someplace else in the county,
You got the
same
same-
soil type, same forest.
Yeah, you got a plant list to go with. Okay, that was online. Yes, ma'am.
Few questions. One is on invasive species.
Mhm.
is there some kind of app you can scan a picture and check what it is? Because sometimes you don't know, is it this, not
Yeah.
this?
I don't use that. You're nodding your head. What do you use? Picture this?
There's a bunch of them. Picture this is one, Seek or iNaturalist is another.
iNaturalist.
I prefer iNaturalist because it has a citizen science aspect to it where it geotags.
Mhm.
And I'll have people reach out to me from different groups and say, where was that? Because they're trying to track invasive species movement and stuff like that. And it doesn't just do plants, it does fungi, birds, insects, anything that's living. It will give you a list of possible candidates and you can choose from, and then it takes 2 or 3 other people to confirm that it's a good ID. So I think it's a fantastic app.
And that's iNaturalist.
The only thing to be careful of with that is if you find something that's a rare species or an endangered species, don't geotag it too specifically because people will go look for it and then damage it, right? So if you find something that people don't see very often, don't geotag.
Okay, we're gonna go back online. We have another question.
Yeah.
online?
And so BCE, they can also help identify any specimen.
Yeah,
as
they can
well.
come out to your, Virginia Cooperative Extension can come to your property and help you with things like figuring out what plants to use and identifying non-natives and talking about treatments and things along those lines. My office is not, we're not an educational office, we're a regulatory office, so we don't really do that, but Cooperative Extension does offer those kinds of service, and the Department of Forestry, yes, thank you. So yeah, Department of Forestry will come out and also help you to develop a reforestation plan. So they'll provide a lot of really, really good help.
And same with Prince William Soil and Water Conservation
Yeah.
District, the VCAP program, there are brochures on one of the tables downstairs. You could be eligible for financial assistance. And someone will come out to your property and make a plan, and it could be reforesting. You could get money to reforest your property with that program.
Are you doing that countywide or only VCAP's countywide, right?
Yeah, so if you don't live in Prince William County, just find your county soil and water conservation district. And then,
They're all over the place.
yeah.
Big thing.
Yeah, and also other states as well will have them. So we may have people online who are from the buildings in other area.
Yeah.
And so you can find that in probably in Tennessee or North Carolina or wherever.
Separate from USDA stuff, right?
Yes. Another question live.
Just the cooperative extension, we prefer if you email us, because then you can send us pictures. And it's Master Gardener, we have cards downstairs. If you need.
Yeah, stop by their table.
Yes.
They're ready to answer your questions.
Yes,
Cheryl.
you talked about coralberry as a shrub that would come in. And you talked about it as it was a positive thing. Well, we've got lots of coralberry and it's very invasive. And takes over everything so that none of the young trees can get in there and grow. So I'm looking at it as invasive, but you looked at it as good.
Yeah, I do look at it as good. It's there's a lot of good wildlife characteristics to coralberry, both from its fruit and from its leaves. And it also is really good because it can handle disturbed areas. And that's oftentimes where you see it coming in most strongly, is someplace that's been disturbed. So if you feel like you're having trouble getting a seedling to establish there, you might just have a zone of protection where you're enabling that, you're protecting that particular seedling or a small group of seedlings so that they can get a foothold.
It also has a successional niche.
Yes.
So the evolution of the forest, there's a time when it's supposed to have a lot of coralberry. And then as it further evolved, coralberry starts.
And that's why you see it on the disturbed, that's connected, the successional niche and its propensity for disturbed areas, those are tied to each other.
Are technically non-native to Virginia.
Really?
It's from the west of the Appalachians. It's been introduced here, but
Oh.
it is still native to the Mid-Atlantic. And not
Yeah.
native to Virginia.
Yeah, but you'll find it all over the place.
But Virginia says its nativity is unknown.
Oh, okay. I did not realize it.
That was from the first of July. So
Yeah,
it had to have been in the coastal plain.
yeah.
So, sorry, it is 12:30, lunch is starting now. So I don't know.
If you want to flunk down and hang with all the people that are crowding the lunchroom, go ahead. If you want to ask a couple more questions, I'll stay around.
And then once